And he would give little ideas of what his plan was. And that's what he said. He would be speaking in English, because it was for his disciples, he said. Not that he was going to speak in Hindi to the local inhabitants or Braj, but he wanted to speak to his disciples. He was training them up in Krishna consciousness.
We lived in Keshi by the banks of the Jamuna, and every morning we would attend Mangal Arti in Keshi, and after that Achyutananda Swami would take a Sankirtan party and would go all the way to Ramanreti, where the Krishna Balaram temple was under construction. And then would walk back along the Parikrama path that followed the Jamuna River and go to the Radha Damodar temple in time to meet Srila Prabhupada there. And Prabhupada would lead us in the Jai Radha Madhava prayers. And then he would speak on Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And although we had heard what he was saying before, it was the basic Krishna conscious philosophy, in that atmosphere it had tremendous impact. I can't imagine how fortunate we were, that small group of us, to be in the most auspicious place, Vrindavan, and then within Vrindavan, in such an auspicious place where the Goswamis used to sit together, and to be there at such an auspicious time, Kartik, with Krishna's pure representative, Srila Prabhupada. It was simply Srila Prabhupada's kindness upon us that he made this arrangement to impress upon us this incredible philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So powerful, so important, so profound. So it was an incredible month, and a month that I will remember my entire life. Certainly, it moved me very deeply.
But once we were walking in Vrindavan along the road, and it was just a couple of us, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, Prabhupada just stops. And he turned around, and he looked at me straight in the face, and he said, so Dinanath, you will become a pure devotee? Simultaneously, it was a question, but it was a directive too. He was inquiring, but at the same time, he was giving me a directive. And I immediately answered, I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. Then, about a day later, we're walking again the same way. He stops again, turns and looks at me, and he says to me, don't change anything. Turns back around, and keeps walking.
Prabhupada's room at the Radha Damodar temple, you can see behind, there's like these little holes. It lets the wind come through. And you can actually see behind in the courtyard. So Shyamadundar's daughter, Saraswati, was there, and she was pulling on a shirt of a little Bengali gentleman. And she was telling the gentleman, who is Krishna? Do you know who is Krishna? And the gentleman looked at this amused look on his face. Saraswati may have been 4 or 5 years old at the time. She was very young. And Prabhupada was looking, and we were looking. And the man was amused that this little girl would ask him that. And then she told him, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you should surrender to him. And Prabhupada says, just see, she's a guru. She's preaching about Krishna.
We were all sick with fever and dysentery, and because the conditions were very austere. And I remember Vishaka and I, we used to prefer to just jump in the Jamuna River, even though it was completely pitch dark and we couldn't see anything, we couldn't touch the bottom, rather than go in the bathroom, which was slimy and indescribable. So then Prabhupada would give lectures in the morning on Bhagavatam, and in the evening on Nectar of Devotion. At that time, the courtyard was just dust, and there was a lot of, I remember, rubble around it. And to me, the temple looked like it was bombed out. We couldn't even tell it was a temple, the front of it. It was all like crumbling, and the inside there was rubble everywhere in the courtyard, and it was dust. But actually, I prefer the dust because it was the original dust where the 6 Goswamis sat. And Prabhupada did mention in his lecture how the 6 Goswamis used to sit in that very courtyard discussing Bhagavatam. And Jiva Goswami would be sitting and writing his commentaries, and another one would be singing the verses. So we were sitting in that same place hearing Prabhupada discuss Bhagavatam. And then after the evening nectar devotion, Prabhupada would have darshan in his room. And that time, he would just talk very informally. I remember him warning us not to associate with the Babajis. And he talked about Markat Vairagya, that the monkey has many wives. He's vegetarian, and he's renounced, but he has many wives. So the Babajis are like that. He told us, he said we shouldn't associate with them.
This pandal was organized for Srila Prabhupada after the Vrindavan meetings, where Srila Prabhupada spoke on nectar of devotion in the Rupa Goswami Samadhi. So immediately afterwards, we came to Hyderabad. This place was exhibition grounds in the center of the Hyderabad city. And for about 10 days, Prabhupada gave lectures morning and evening. These deities are Radha Madhava that came from Calcutta. That must be in the morning session, starting by Kirtan. So there were quite a good number of devotees, maybe at least 50. It was very successful. That was the most successful program of Srila Prabhupada in Hyderabad. Every day, about not less than 5,000, sometimes 10,000 used to come, especially in the evenings. And morning, 1,000 or 2,000. It was the beginning of our mission in Hyderabad. And all the most important people attended as chief guests. There was a committee also formed of some of the most important businessmen. So they were very impressed by this program. One gentleman, Mr. G. Pullareddy, was having a sweet shop in Hyderabad. He came forward to donate a piece of land measuring about 950 square yards in the center of the city. And now our ISKCON Hyderabad is situated there. At that time in Hyderabad, there had not been any rain for at least 1 year. In the last monsoon, there was no rain. But during our program there, in the last 2-3 days, the rain started. And Prabhupada mentioned this is due to our kirtan. It also came in newspapers that the Sankirtan is bringing rain.
So I was greeting the deities and offering to the deities, and Prabhupada came up and paid his obeisances to the deities and then walked back to give his morning class. Well, I'd always been trained that you never leave the deities alone. So even though I wanted to go listen to Prabhupada, I felt as a Pujari it was my duty to stay there. So I was staying there, and about 30 seconds later, Bhavananda comes running back down to where I was and said, "Oh, you are here? Good." Prabhupada wanted to make sure someone was with the deities. So that really struck me, that here, everybody's chanting Jai Prabhupada, and he's going up, getting flower garlands, getting worshipped. But he's thinking, oh, is somebody with Radha and Krishna? And that was really nice. Both to see that Prabhupada had, was thinking like that, and then to feel that I had, understood Prabhupada in that way. So one morning, Prabhupada gave a lecture, and after the lecture, one Indian gentleman came up to Prabhupada. He had just purchased a small book. One of these small Krishna consciousness, topmost yoga system was out. And he asked Prabhupada to autograph it. So I was standing right next to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada smiled and said yes. So the gentleman handed him a pen, and Prabhupada autographed the book. So then another gentleman, seeing the opportunity, took a book and asked Prabhupada to autograph it, and Prabhupada autographed it. So I was standing right next to Prabhupada. So another man, the third man, he pulls out of his pocket a little notepad and with a pen, and he says, asked Prabhupada for his autograph. Prabhupada looked at him and smiled and said, "No book, no autograph."
We were in Hyderabad. At this time, I was torn between, making my commitment to maintaining brahmacharya and considering even going into sannyas and thinking about marriage. I knew in my heart that I wasn't, at the time wasn't right and I was young, but my spirit wanted it, It wanted to live a renounced life, but my body and my mind wasn't ready, mature enough for it. So it was tearing my being in different directions. So I couldn't sleep one night. So I got up and I walked down this building we were staying in. I walked down the hallway and I kind of like peeked my head in Prabhupada's room. It was about 11 o'clock at night. And I peeked my head in and I saw Prabhupada walking, pacing back and forth, up and down. So I kind of like wormed in or something, slimed in and offered my obeisances. And he was walking and he looked over at me and waved to me, get up, come, So as he's walking, he brings me over to him and we're walking side by side, back and forth, and he's Hare Krishna, So he goes, yes. So I said, Prabhupada, I'm thinking about going to Hrishikesh. He just became silent, he's listening. And he gave me a chance to explain. He didn't ask anything, I said, I'm thinking about going to Rishikesh and maybe to live as a brahmachari, to go and live in an ashram. I have to be around any women and things, and I can dedicate myself to brahmachari life. So after explaining my heart and everything, he stopped. And it was like time stood still and the earth stopped, and everything. And he just looked at me dead in the face, in the eyes, and he said, please don't do that. I wasted 12 years simply sitting in Vrindavan. He said, just tell everybody you meet about Krishna. At that point, I felt my problem was solved. I didn't know what I was going to do personally, but my problem was solved, and I bowed down, said, thank you, Prabhupada. He started walking again. I went and took rest.
Palika and Jamuna and Malati in the kitchen, they were preparing prasadam for Srila Prabhupada, and I was in the front room, and then Srila Prabhupada was in another interior room on the ground floor behind his desk, and his servant brought in a sadhu from South India, and he sat down in Srila Prabhupada's room, but I didn't hear any conversation going on between them. It was like, why aren't they speaking to each other? And then all of a sudden I heard a huge verbal argument, and they were screaming at each other at the top of their lungs in Hindi. No, 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 no. And all of a sudden, I was really concerned, well, what's going on? And then all of a sudden this guy storms out of the house. And for the next 2 weeks, Srila Prabhupada was so grave. And the lectures, if you listen to those lectures, he's talking about Chatur Varnam Mayashristam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. Krishna has established a natural system of Varna and Ashram, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra. It is something that happens within society naturally, and people are judged to be in one of these categories, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, by their qualities and by the work that they do. Never in this verse does Krishna mention anything about birth. So we found out later on that what this argument was about was this guy was coming in and saying, you can't do this. You can't take Malechas and Yavanas from the West, meat eaters, and convert them into Brahmins, give them the sacred thread, give them the sannyas, tridandi. And of course, this argument had been presented in different ways to his Acharya, his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. So this was a fight that was going on for a long time, and Srila Prabhupada in the next 2 weeks quoted all the different verses from all the different shastras explaining that Krishna consciousness is a universal movement. It is not just for India. It includes the entire world.
They wanted devotees to come down from Calcutta and Mayapur for a pandal, because they had no devotees there. So I took Radha Madhava from here, and that other Lord Chaitanya, Tarankanti Ghosh, had made for us. And we went down and set up the pandal there. Prabhupada was looking at the deities, and he turned to me and he said, is that Radha Madhava? I said, oh yes, Prabhupada, we brought them from Mayapur. Anyway, he said, you should not take from Mayapur. He said, but what's done is done. When you take them back, they're to stay there forever.
This day, I was working in the kitchen under the supervisor of Panchadevida Swami, cleaning and all the details. And it's already after 9 in the morning and nobody came for prasad. So I asked Maharaj, why nobody's coming for prasad? He said, in the temple there's a fire sacrifice. And I said, what is fire sacrifice? He said, Prabhupada giving initiation. After that they will come. I said, what is initiation? So I was insisted to come and see what is a fire sacrifice and the initiation. I don't know anything about that. Maybe that was 3 or 4 weeks I was there. So he said, okay, you can go for 10 minutes, a lot of work to do in the kitchen. So I came and I stood in that side of the corner watching what is going on. Then Prabhupada saw me. He said, you come and sit down for initiation. Then Prabhupada asked me many questions during that initiation. First he gave me the beads, then he said, what is your name? I said, my name is Sekhar Kumar, but Giriraj Swami and everybody call me Haridas. He said, okay, keep that name, but you must follow the teaching of Haridas. Then he asked me, do you follow 4 principles? Because I don't understand, I said, no. Then Giriraj Swami said, Haridas, those not eating meat, not fish, not drinking. I said, yeah, those I know, those I follow. Then gave me the beads, and then he sent me back. He said, now you go to kitchen and start working. The fire sacrifice is still not over. And when I gone back to kitchen to work, and Panchadevida Maharaj got angry at me. He said, what took long time, he was send you for 10 minutes. I said, I just got the initiation. He said, what you're doing, go back there. So I came back again, and that was like a climax of the fire sacrifice.
In 1972, in December, Srila Prabhupada went to the house of one Vaishnava gentleman named Kartikeya Mahadevya. And this particular gentleman had some very nice apartment, luxurious apartment, fronting the ocean. So Srila Prabhupada went to his place and stayed there. It's pretty spacious quarters. Quite a few devotees every night would come there. So we went to see Srila Prabhupada. We had come back from a trip to South India. We had gone to Madurai, Coimbatore, Bangalore, several places. And Prabhupada says, someday I want to go there and see. So Prabhupada said, would you please make arrangements to take me there someday? I says, okay, Prabhupada. And then we told Prabhupada, well, Prabhupada, we've been to some place in Coimbatore, and we worked really hard, and we were going to so many places, and we were trying to make life members, but we could hardly make any life members. And we went to some other place, and we hardly did anything. We just sat in the room and chanted, and we ended up making like 20 life members. So we don't understand this. And Prabhupada said, well, you don't understand because you're too attached to the result. And then Prabhupada quoted that verse from Bhagavad Gita, Karmani evadikaraste mafalesu kadachana. That, you do your duty, but don't be attached to the result. And Prabhupada says, you leave the result to Krishna. And Prabhupada said, you leave the result to Krishna, act sincerely. And Prabhupada says, if you're very sincere, Krishna himself personally will see that you become successful. And Prabhupada says, but you have to understand, this is not simply about an amount of money. He says, you do the service, and Krishna will judge. Krishna will decide. And then Prabhupada says, my Guru Maharaj one time told me that even if there's not so many people, we can preach to the wall. That doesn't matter. We can preach to the wall. Prabhupada says, you just go on preaching, that's all. You just be sincere, preach, and Krishna will make it successful.
The last day of the Pandal was a Sunday, and more people attended than ever before. There's tens of thousands of people in the huge Pandal. Prabhupada lectured very strongly from the Vyasasana, and then when he finished, the kirtan began, as it did every evening. This kirtan was especially enthusiastic. And then at one point, he got up off the Vyasasana and went before the deities, clapping. And then he started to circumambulate the deities with a very light step. He went around once, and then he went around a second time, and then a third time. And when he came before the deities, very gracefully, he put his arms in the air and he began to dance. It was almost as if he was weightless. He danced so effortlessly. And everyone was electrified by this. Everyone in the audience was riveted on Srila Prabhupada dancing before the deities. At that point, I was in the audience. I was photographing the Pandal program. And it felt as if all the sinful reactions of all those people suddenly lifted. It was an extraordinary feeling. There was such a lightness there. It's stated in the Nectar Devotion that if you clap your hands in kirtan, then the sinful reactions leave you, just like birds leaving a tree when there's a sudden noise. They all fly off together. And that's what it felt like. There's this burden of karma lifting all at one time.
In spite of all the stories of Prabhupada, I, who had been an English major in college and read a lot of fiction, had always had an idea of there being a dichotomy between the author and his works. So I just always had this keenness to meet Prabhupada, the author of this book, the Bhagavad Gita and other ones that were coming out. And when Prabhupada came to Australia, what struck me was that whether Prabhupada was speaking before an audience of 600-700 people or whether he was just in a room alone with me, he was basically speaking the Bhagavatam and the Gita. He was the Gita and the Bhagavatam. You know, you might think that someone would have a public persona, but then when they get back home, you know, there might be other topics of conversation. But he would preach just as strongly to me as the only other person in the room as he would in a huge rented hall with a large crowd. That inspired me to launch a very, very deep study of Srila Prabhupada's books. And I think because I did that and continue to do it to this day, I've never faltered in my faith in Krishna consciousness.
We are selling about 25 to 30,000 rupees worth books daily.
Actually, I didn't know about this movement until Mr. Dadlani came to my office. He was our neighbor, and he came asking whether I could make arrangement for Swamiji's stay in Jakarta. So I immediately told him, okay. At that time, there were not many hotels, so I offered to give our own building. We started to make preparation. We moved to another house and gave the whole building to